Hello and welcome to Deconstructing Worship, a series of positive and constructive conversations about the current culture of modern worship. I'm your co-host, Steve Quantick.
And I am your other co-host, Kyle Treble.
Okay, here we go, episode 1. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, dude. I'm excited. I'm super excited.
Yeah,
I can't wait. I can't wait for the conversations to flow and just see what happens. So,
for the first episode, in an idea I stole from Dustin Kensrew's Carry the Fire podcast, to avoid us kind of sitting here pontificating and getting up on our soapbox for the length of the entire first episode, we invited our very good friend Rob Westall onto episode 1 just to interview us. Rob, and just to help us to communicate our vision for what this podcast is going to be. Let's introduce Rob Westall. Rob.
Hello.
Rob. What up, Rob?
Hey, buddy.
How's it going, lads? All right?
Yeah,
Doing good. Excited to have you here, buddy.
You just want to get me the sack from Gateway, don't you? Leading worship. That's what you invited me on.
That's the thing. We're very aware that we've got a lot of people on, and I'd say we are actively involved in worship, and I think it's a very scary thing to put out a podcast where you're taking apart worship a little bit, and you know that these people are going to hear, but we mean this with the deepest of love, and we just want to see worship culture just flourish and not have these certain things that may be holding it back continue to hold it back, with a caveat of we love everyone involved.
100%.
Let's do this.
No, but guys, it's I think it is a very positive thing. Sometimes we're all involved in church worship teams, and you kind of just get on with it, don't you? And if anything, this lockdown has made people think a bit more. I mean, from a personal point of view, I've only had a couple of weeks off. I've been doing it every week, streaming. But,
yeah, you have.
But you've got to. It's good to start of the year always press the pause, have a reflect, and then look at everything. And especially in this time where lots more people are tuning in to worship streams from churches than ever before, and people who would never normally set foot inside a church traditionally.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, you've been kind of non-stop, haven't you? And I think like me and Helen is my wife, by the way. For those who don't know, we kind of had a chat about everything when everything went into lockdown, and a few months later, and this is one of those things where I'm kind of like scared to put it out there, but I shouldn't be. We kind of started thinking, okay, now we can't physically attend a church. What are the important things about church, and what are the important things about worship? And it kind of made you think, oh, maybe we haven't been doing it the best it could be.
Because when you're so immersed in it as well, because I play electric guitar and MD at my church in Cardiff, and and it's just fascinating, isn't it? When you kind of take time away from something, you're like, it just gives you the opportunity just to consider what is it you miss about it, and what is it you wouldn't miss about it if it went away.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, basically, just to introduce a little bit of... every episode is going to have a loose structure, as you can tell. This has been very loose structured so far. But we're going to build it around like 3 questions. And those 3 questions are going to provide just a bit of a framework. But obviously, it'll be very informal and lots of chat. Because we want this to be a conversation more than an interview, I guess. So, shall we launch into the questions, Mr. Rob?
Yeah, let's go for it. So who wants to go first? Who am I addressing this to first?
I'm easy. You pick.
Oh, wait. Hang on. There we go. I had to point the right way. Let's do...
I'm easy. I'll go first. I don't mind.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can phone a friend. There's a 50-50 as well. But what was the first experience you remember of congregational worship?
I'm going to kind of answer that in 2 sections. So I'm going to answer in kind of like my actual first experience, not being a Christian, and then I'll answer it with my experience where I was actively involved in that worship. My first experience was, so just to kind of give a little bit of a backstory to this first experience. I went to see The Passion of Christ with Helen. She kind of took me along, who was my girlfriend at the time. And it ended up being just this insane moment where Christ just kind of hit me in the chest, and my life was kind of changed forever from there. And I remember coming out of the cinema and walking towards, I think it was probably Starbucks, I can't remember, it was a coffee shop anyway, and I remember just breaking down in tears, and I just said, I need Jesus. And then that was a Saturday, and the next day she's like, do you want to come to church tomorrow? And I was like, yes. And so my next kind of day was in church, and it was my first ever time in a church, to be honest, to my recollection anyway. Maybe I'd been in one as a kid, I can't remember though. And then I remember kind of just watching it, to be honest. I wasn't kind of actively involved. There was this kind of like flurry in my kind of chest a little bit, and I was kind of a bit kind of in awe of kind of everything that was going on, and a little bit weirded out, to be honest, as well. But not in a bad way, like weirded out in a way of like really intrigued. And it was this little family church in Barry called Coastlands. And I remember this man down the front, and he had one of these faces that is, you know, when people just have this really friendly face, like, and
like
he was, thank you, man. And he had this like big bushy beard, and he just had his arms out wide, and he was just spinning. He must be, I think he was in his 60s at the time. He was the pastor, which I found out later on. And he was just spinning, and he just looked so full of joy, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And I was just mesmerized. That's what sticks in my mind most. I can't really remember much about the music that was going on at the time, but that's the image that really holds a special place in my mind. And then my experience of kind of being actively engaged in worship, I definitely obviously had a lot of times prior to this, but this is one that I really remember. My memory is awful, so it's lucky that I remember kind of yesterday. I'm not joking. And I remember being in a different church, actually. So this is maybe like a year or two later. This was in King's Church in Newport. And I remember being kind of down the front, and it's kind of like, this image is like burned onto my mind in like a really, really positive way, actually, of me coming up with a few guys from Coastlands Church. And just there was just this atmosphere of connection, obviously to God, but with everyone around me. And I'd never felt anything like that before. I'm quite and I'm probably like, if you're into the Enneagram, I am a 4. I am the individualist. And so everything kind of in my life has been that. And it's not been a thing I tried to do it that way, but I'm quite individual in the things that I do. So to then be in a place where I'm feeling so connected to everyone around me, and there's this like almost not a battle cry, but this communal cry towards God. It was amazing. So those are my first experiences.
That's incredible. So Steve, what about you? What is it similar or different or?
So yeah, quite different really, because I was born and raised in like a Baptist church in Grimsby where I grew up. Literally carried in as a babe in arms. So it's a bit of a weird one. So that my journey to faith was a bit different in that, like, I kind of grew up assuming I was a Christian. Then when I was 15, I realised I wasn't. And similarly, Kyle, it was an encounter with the cross. There was like this Bible study about the cross about the crucifixion in like Sunday school, like junior church as they called it. And it just impacted me in a way that I think I'd heard the story before, but it just impacted me in a way that it never had before, and that's when I became a Christian. But there was a group of musicians, the worship team, and my dad would play piano for it, it was it was not kind of slick musically, but I think I just remember it being, it was very kind of responsive. We didn't have kind of like huge spontaneous sections or anything. That kind of my understanding of that kind of came much later, but it was very heartfelt. I think I remember that. I remember kind of having that sense about it, even though my dad's an amazing musician, but like the overall level of musicianship in the band was it was good. It just wasn't like what I would later discover in like Soul Survivor and things like that. But yeah, so that was kind of my first experience of it.
What I love about this conversation already is, and we know this already, don't we? But everyone's experience is going to be so different, and I'm really excited to hear all of our guests' experience of these questions. So yeah, it's going to be really cool.
And so, Steve, staying with you for a minute, what's your favourite thing about worship? That is a tough question, by the way. Who set these?
It was me, unfortunately. But yeah, I didn't realise. I think for me, it is the passion of it. It's like the kind of passion that can spill into, that can be present in, in it being, quite structured, as my church was when I was growing up, or in kind of these huge moments of spontaneity. I think the kind of passion and freedom of kind of like the corporate worship experience, and like Kyle was saying earlier, just that sense of all being one, and in terms of facing towards something, you know what I mean? And I think, that's ultimately it really. It's just the kind of, and that kind of encompasses obviously a kind of a load of musical styles, but a lot of my kind of most positive memories of worship are, there was one time we were, playing, I had my amp in a little stand next to me when I was playing at City Church in Cardiff, and I was just kind of bouncing around so much, my amp literally fell off the stand and fell onto the floor. And I feel like those are the most kind of powerful moments of worship for me. So when you throw yourself into it with reckless abandon. And that's, like when it's just like you are kind of lost in the moment, but connected, you know what I mean? It's not kind of like those kind of introverted eyes closed moments. It's like you're boshing it away and hammering away at your guitar and looking out into a congregation and seeing people who are there with you, and that's just so just spurs you on, you know what I mean?
It's a bit like a gig, isn't it, or a football match or rugby international. But when Wales score tries, me and the kids are jumping up and down, going yeah, and it is that reckless abandon. I know exactly what you mean by that phrase. And in worship, we tend to. I often have to. I feel convicted if I'm not going bananas sometimes, because what we're celebrating there is much more important than a try by Shane Williams or somebody. Carl, what about you? Same question to you.
Favorite, like you said, that's a really hard question. I feel
what's your favorite chocolate bar type question?
I'd say all of the things that I would say all boil down to that intimate connection with God. It's like no matter kind of where you are in your life, whether you're kind of like shouting from the mountaintops, you're having the best time of your life, or whether you are literally finding it hard to even get out of bed every day, or you're weeping at anything, like no matter what it is, I feel like worship for me is a place where I can just be. I don't have to kind of put on the, especially in British culture, that the stiff upper lip. Worship is a place where I can just let it out. And that comes from whether I'm in the quote unquote congregation or whether I'm up leading behind the drum kit. It's just an expression of wherever I am in my walk with Jesus at the time. I feel like that's probably my favorite thing about it. and then to be able to, like, talking about when I am physically on the drums, to be able to be authentic behind my instrument and see that affect the atmosphere in whatever building or place that's in, and to have the kind of like privilege of leading other people into that intimate place. I'd say, yeah, that is 100% where, like I say, I could probably name 1,000 things that I love about worship, but it all boils down to that, I think.
When you're up there playing drums, of course, and playing guitar, Steve, it's a very different experience to being in the congregation, having that, when you're in the congregation without an instrument, so to speak. I know voice is an instrument, but it's just you and God, but you're kind of serving everybody by playing the instrument the best you can do it, really, and it's a very different kind of experience, even from perhaps people who are singing on the stage leading worship. So, you know, is it sort of like an act of sacrificial worship, playing the drums sometimes, or do you feel like you can express yourself like somebody would, you know, sing or dance or whatever? Is the drums an extension of your body, really?
I'd say it's been both. It's more like, now it is. I mean, I've been playing for an amount of time now since I was 18. I'm 34 now, 16 years, and it's. I would say that now it. Depending, there may be a song that will pop up here and there, but for the most part, it's just I feel free behind the instrument, and it's. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, you'll be the same, Steve, with your students. It's all about repetition and repetition. I say this to my students all the time. It's like repeat, and to the point where you don't have to think about the thing anymore, and then you can just be free with it. To that practice time at home then frees you up to be free when you're in that worship setting. But I have been in those places, especially kind of earlier on in my playing, where I wasn't so confident maybe with tracks, and maybe my practice routine at home wasn't so great, where I would kind of rock up and kind of be focusing so much about the notes that I was playing, and then I would come off the stage or wherever I was and not have really engaged in worship at all. And I think those times are the times that really inspired me to put in more practice, because I don't want worship to become a function over a relational expression to God. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think it's one of those things that the more you put into it in the private places, the more free you can be with it in the public places.
Yeah, 100%.
It's interesting.
100%.
That's really interesting, because you know, that's often a battle. I mean, because there are functionalities to worship, aren't there? There are functions, you know, especially in terms of like playing a physical instrument, and you don't want to play bum notes and distract people, and it is kind of sacrificial in a way, because you're serving people. That's what ministry is. It means to serve, doesn't it? And you're serving them, but actually doing that repetition and that preparation and that practice actually leads to the freedom. Ironically, it's quite an interesting.
Yeah, I feel like you can definitely you can practice spontaneity, which is weird. It's like this juxtaposition in a sentence, isn't it? Like, yeah, you can, like, it's kind of like the way I describe it. Again, I do this a lot, so this is in my mind a lot with my students, is the more you kind of think about it as it like a language, and you think about like as a baby learning to speak, they get to the point where they have practiced making these sounds over and over again. It gets to the point where you can freely talk, but it comes through practice, doesn't it? You, like, a baby doesn't kind of come out the womb and then automatically be able to hold a full-on conversation with you. It's through practicing those goo goo gaga sounds, and practicing with their muscles in their jaw, and making these vocalizations and stuff, where they can come to the point of being able to hold a full conversation, and not, like, right now we're not having. Well, I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say before I say it. You don't go and then say the sentence. That would be so awkward.
Yeah, I mean, you can. I think you're right, Carl. You can 100% rehearse spontaneity. You really, really can, because you end up. It just adds more tools to your belt, doesn't it? Like that you can bring into those spontaneous moments. Like one of the reasons that you hear people being so resistant to having an MD, a musical director, somebody like when you're on in-ear monitors, somebody speaking into, providing direction for the band and, running click and things like that. One of the kind of chief resistances you kind of hear to that is, oh no, or kind of rob the spontaneity, and it's just like, well, actually, it helps you steward the spontaneity well. Because rather than everyone kind of just boshing away and like, the worship leader kind of signaling to everyone, we're going to play 4, 5, 6 chord and keep looping around that, the member of the band who doesn't see that and starts, just launches back into the chorus, is, it's like a jarring, it's just this jarring moment. But actually, having stewarded spontaneity is really interesting. It kind of allows you to kind of use the spontaneity well and navigate it well.
I think it's a really good thing, like you said, because there is definitely resistance to kind of MDs and stuff. But I definitely think for the church setting, it's a really good tool because you are playing with different people a lot. So like you will find that if you were to play with certain people over and over and over again, you build up like this musical relationship with each other, and you can 9 times out of 10 feel what's going to happen next. But when you are in that situation where maybe you don't play so often, maybe there's like, I don't know, 3 drummers, and you rotate, so maybe you're only on once every 3 weeks or something like that, and then you're playing with different musicians all the time. I think that MD is just such a good thing to have. Because and it all depends on the MD though. If you get the MD that is very rigid and structured and wants to play the song exactly how the song is played, but maybe don't have an MD. But if you've got an MD with the right heart for worship and understands kind of what worship is for, like it's not this show where you need to make sure you get the intro perfect and finish all at exactly the same time compared to the track. If you have an MD that wants to engage people in those intimate places like I was talking about earlier, I think it can be a really useful tool.
Yeah, 100%.
And this is all within the context of like a church with a band. I mean, a lot of people listening to this perhaps they'll have greater... That it won't affect some people if you've just got an acoustic guitar and a keyboard. It's happy days.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, I think we are definitely coming from that space of like, I think because just for our own experiences, we're in bands, aren't we? We're kind of in more worship bands, and outwardly knowing that is not the only way to worship.
Totally.
So just to kind of put that out there.
Which leads us nicely on to this killer question, guys. Right. So
yes.
I think you might want to toss a coin to see who wants to go first on this, or perhaps you do want to think about what you're going to say about this one before you say it. But what one thing, and you're only allowed one thing, and it could be something really trivial, it could be something really, philosophical and deep. What one thing would you change about worship?
I would say, because I'm only allowed one thing, I think the biggest thing for me that I would like to see, and this isn't everywhere, this is just certain times, certain places. It's for churches to not be afraid of the mess of worship. I think that's probably one of my, for lack of a better words, peeves when it comes to kind of modern worship culture. Is it's great, and I love some of the music that is coming out from the big worship teams. Everyone knows who's I'm talking about. God has 100% talked to me through those songs, and they've blessed me so much. But I think because we have this model of what these worship teams look like, we as churches want to be these people, and we try and be Hillsong, or we try and be Bethel or Elevation, or name any kind of big worship band you want, and it's all very polished. which is great for an album, which is great for a record that you want to buy and play and recreate those experiences in your headphones as you're taking a walk or wherever you are. So there's nothing wrong with it. I think what comes wrong with it is when people try and replicate that when it's not them. And understanding that worship isn't this karaoke situation where you're just trying to play these songs exactly how these other guys played them. And actually just dive deep into that, like Steve said earlier, I love the term, that reckless abandon of just giving yourself in worship. And sometimes that looks messy. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes that looks really messy. Whether I know I've had times where I just haven't been able to play anymore. Like tears have just been streaming down my face or whatever the situation is. And I've been in situations before where I've had members of the band kind of looking at me like, come on. And I'm like, you know what? I kind of don't care. Do you know what I mean? Like this is worship. And I've had people from congregations come up to me and thank me for being real. Do you know what I mean? Because I think if we can be real on a stage, that allows people to be real surrounded by other people. I think like just coming from myself, when I'm in a congregation, especially in the past, I am quite self-aware of myself, especially being a drummer. I can hide behind my drum kit. Do you know what I mean? And when I'm in a congregation and it's just me singing, I can feel quite exposed, especially if, and this gets into kind of technical kind of talk now, especially if like it's quite quiet, the worship, like it's quite quiet coming forward. I can hear my voice really well and I'm just quite conscious that I can't sing. So, and I mean really can't sing. And I just think if we can model the idea that it's okay to be messy in your worship, I think that'll just set a lot of people free who are being led by you. And I think just maybe taking kind of the hand off of the reins a little bit of how, let's say Sunday mornings, because that tends to be the majority of churches at the moment, taking the reins off of how that looks, taking it off of, okay, we have 3 songs to start and then someone will come up and give the announcements and then maybe we'll do a chorus of the previous song that we just did. And then the preacher will come up and that'll happen every Sunday for the next 3 years. And like I said, like you were saying, Rob, function is really good. I think we definitely need function because otherwise it's kind of just a free-for-all, or maybe, to be fair, I don't think that would be too bad. But I definitely think the fear of letting those reins go and just seeing what would happen. Because I know for me, in those worship experiences where it has been freer, where you haven't seen people, you get the leaders at the front who you can see they're waiting for that last note, and they're almost like, oh, is it my turn to get up? Am I going to get up now? And you're like, just let people be. Let people be.
I'm going to say something a bit controversial now, but it's just like you see the inverse of this quite a lot, but you don't see somebody during the worship time going up and tapping the arm of the preacher and going, "Hey, could you shave 10 minutes off your preach? Because we're really feeling this. We're really feeling this worship at the moment, and much as there might be people, much as kind of the passive absorption of a lecture might be quite good. It's not always the passive absorption of a lecture, but it can be.
I think that's a really good point, though, Duke. I think
worship, at least worship is active. You know what I mean? At least you're actively participating.
I think that's a really good point, and like kind of just to piggyback off of that. And this isn't to kind of downplay the importance of like messages and stuff, because I know that there's been certain preaches or messages that has been brought to a congregation that have really impacted me in the past. But I definitely think that we, as a Western church, we definitely put so much importance in the message being brought by the Pope figure of the church to the congregation. And I definitely think that leadership is so important. We need leadership, but I think we need to put the owningness, that's a word, let's use that one, on people themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know that where I've been in study of whatever I'm currently working through in my faith, whether it's like a theological issue, a lot of those lately, and certain things, and then to like rock up and all you want to do is kind of engage in worship with the people around you and connect with God on that corporate level, and you feel like that is kind of cut short quite a lot. And I wouldn't say it's anyone's intention. I know, like, leaders that I've had in the past and leaders that I have now, I wouldn't say that they don't want people to engage in worship. I wouldn't say that they want to actively stop that and want to hear their voices. There probably has been those in the past. I think it's just the culture, isn't it? It's the culture of how churches are run that has just kind of overtaken the way people maybe would kind of think for themselves how best to run a church, sort of thing. And I say I'm not an expert, do you know what I mean? And I think this is only my opinion, and I definitely put that out there. This is my opinion of it, and I wouldn't say that I am right, but it's just it's an opinion, and I know there are a lot of people out there that agree as well.
Yeah, so it's really, really rare that an evening that, you know, purports to be set aside for just worship, just playing and worshipping, it's very rare in my experience that an evening like that stays that way. It often, like you say, kind of gets, I don't want to use the word hijacked, but hijacked by people who crave that structure, often leaders who crave that structure. And what started out in intention to be a spontaneous evening of worship can often become as structured as any other church meeting or as any other prayer meeting. And I think it is so true to say, I mean, I have been impacted by so many skillful communicators of the message of the gospel, 100%. I'm not kind of decrying that at all. But also, I do strongly believe that when we abandon ourselves to the act of musical worship, you become like what you worship. I think that's true of life. You know, like, you know, at the moment, I'm really into the band Thrice. And so, you know, one of my guitars is tuned down a tone, so I can play Thrice songs, and I can play in drop C, so I can play more Thrice songs. And I'm having a baritone guitar built for me, so I can play more Thrice songs. Like, you know, or Thrice-like songs in my hardcore band. You know what I mean? Like, but you become like what you worship, you know, and I'm not kind of saying by any means that I believe that, you know, Thrice are God in any way, but they are, you know, for a lot of people, what they have to kind of emulate are the kind of icons of culture. You know, they wouldn't call it worship, but it certainly is.
No, I completely agree, dude.
It's difficult, Nick, because, like, we're talking a lot about a structure that is kind of pre-lockdown in a way for a lot of people, and now the landscape has completely changed, and it's basically like a big ball of plasticine that we can shape, really. So it's quite interesting you're talking about this, and I would just want to play, not devil's advocate, but you know what I mean, just give the other side of it, is in that sometimes there's a lot of people I know who I've heard say and have said to me, gosh, the worship went on a bit today, didn't it? Gosh. So there's that, and we are obviously biased because we're all involved in worship.
Yeah. Oh, that 100%. There is the flip side of it. Yeah, 'cause I've heard of church environments where the worship leader gets so lost in their own personal act of worship, they leave the congregation behind. They don't engage with people because it's one of those great contradictions of worship, isn't it? It's like, it's for the audience of one, but we're expected to engage with the congregation as well. So it can't all be about the audience
definitely.
Of one. It's that balancing act, isn't there? And if it can go too far in one direction or the other, because, you know, if you're just standing up there playing your favourite worship songs with your eyes closed, then there's nothing to engage with as a person who is there to, let's face it, like my hope is that very few people would turn up to church on a Sunday morning with the intention of folding their arms and saying, well, this clearly isn't, the intention is not to involve me in this.
I tell you what though, when you are up there and you look out and there is somebody folding their arms, and that does happen, man, is that off-putting. And I used to do pubs and club gigs, right? And there'd always be like this crotchety old man folding his arms, giving me the evils, and I'd go one of two ways. One, I didn't want to be there on a Saturday night singing, so I'd either just think, I can't be bothered, and just ramble through the set, or I would sing my very best, eyeballing that bloke the entire time. and lo and behold, and you'd walk off the stage, and this bloke, and he'd come up to you and think, oh, here we go. And he'd go, best artist, we've had you for 10 years.
Can I like, just to use your phrase, devil's advocate, what was just said then, do you think we get those times of being very aware that the congregation aren't engaging, or there is the guy folding his arms, or things like that? Do you think, and this is kind of like going to be out there a little bit, do you think that we get those times quite a lot because of the way that church isn't a community as much as it is and I use this term really lightly just for lack of a better word, show on a Sunday morning? Because if you think about kind of the way Jesus talks about church, and kind of if anyone has read Letters to the Church by Francis Chan, it's such a powerful book, and it's talking about kind of, I'll give a brief overview of it, and it's just basically the first page of it, and it kind of blew my mind, was so imagine you are stranded on a desert island. You have no prior experience to what a church is or looks like. And all you have is the Bible and just reading about what church was back then. And then kind of like picture what that church looked like. And does it look like your current church? And if it doesn't, does that bother you? And I thought that was such a great introduction to a book, because I went, oh, hello. Do you think that kind of like worry about disengagement from a congregation, because it's going to happen no matter what, because everyone's on a different journey, aren't they? But
and so much so now, with everyone watching online and not being able to sing together, and
especially with little kids running around, we find church so hard to engage with at the moment.
But
I think,
for sure.
I think, but these things are cyclical, I believe, because do you know the kind of Matt Redman song "Heart of Worship"? Do you know that one?
Yeah.
Basically, the church just ended up, Soul Survivor Church ended up kind of becoming almost like connoisseurs of worship. They're very good at worship. And Mike Pilavachi, the pastor, just basically fired the worship team temporarily and said, look, we're just going to stand in the room. We're going to let a song of worship rise up from the room. If we stand in silence for the whole morning, then we do. And but it never happened, because people would and there were awkward pauses, but people would a song would rise up from in the room, and I think that kind of leads on to my response to what you said, Carl, would be that you kind of you do kind of reap what you sow, don't you? If you kind of expect passivity and spectatorship, and I think it's which leads me on to my point, actually, which is about the thing that I would change about congregational worship, is the almost superstition that particularly worship musicians seem to have about the word performance. It's like if you said to a room full of worship musicians, oh, but it's not a performance, every single person in that room would have a different idea of what a performance is, because the thing is, you don't go and see, you don't see a gig or a concert and just feel disengaged from it because it's a performance.
No, that's for sure. It's stigmatized, isn't it? The word performance is really stigmatized.
Exactly. And I think, the heart behind it is to be kind of playing in a way that is self-glorifying and showing off and which unfortunately then leads to kind of this self-effacing Christian culture where people kind of go like, oh, if I played well, it wasn't me, it was the Lord, and you want to say, it wasn't that good, I'm not gonna lie.
It would have been better.
Yeah, it would have been better, exactly. But that's what I'm saying is, like, a part of performance, like if you like go and see, like because I'm a huge McFly fan, and because I didn't get to see their comeback show at the O2,
Busted.
And Busted,
it's all about
great.
you.
It is. There we go. But I've watched, because I kind of, felt like I was missing out. I've watched, a load of live performances by them. I watched, there are lots of, live concerts of theirs on YouTube and things like that, and there are DVDs and that. And you feel like, even watching it at home, you feel utterly engaged, because you feel utterly engaged with it, because for them, performance doesn't mean look at me, kind of, this kind of, worship me kind of pedestal moment. They recognize that performance is an act of collective engagement. If they don't engage with the people who have come there to be in them, it becomes like, this huge participatory experience. I guess like what we're talking about earlier in terms of like, I guess, much as there's that great Mitchell and Webb sketch about it, when football fans kind of say, oh yeah, we beat you, didn't we? We beat you. And it's just like, did you? Were you playing? But like there is that sense of collectiveness about it, that makes it that a good performer will make the people at the very back of the room feel included and feel like that they're singing just to them. And I feel like, being kind of cagey and superstitious about the very word performance doesn't help. It doesn't help at all, because I think there is, on the flip side, it drives me absolutely nuts when you see members of a worship team for whom, like, and I don't know if it's because they've gotten in their own heads about performance and don't want to be seen to be performing, but the people who just kind of stand there. And it's like, do you not know what you've been saved from? You know what I mean? Like, and obviously there are, people who are kind of more introverted naturally, and that's fine. But it's just like, I guess I'm talking about the people who do not outwardly express themselves in worship for fear of being accused of performing and kind of almost projecting something false and inauthentic. Because again, I've heard of people who are just like, well, I don't really like worship music, so my performance is pretending I enjoy it. And that's to me, that's inauthentic, and that's not kind of authenticity is for me is one of the hallmarks of true worship. And we've talked about serving, and that's fine, and serving is awesome, and being able to kind of die to yourself in order to serve. But like, I just think that I think, a performance can be 100% engaging and authentic.
I think this is why this podcast is so good, because you get to talk about these things, and we don't talk about these things. But what you mentioned earlier, Steve, when you were answering the question, was you said that the problem with the word performance is that there's lots of different interpretations of what there is in people's heads, and just now you picked up on one of the thoughts I had going around my head of what people can perceive it to be, and it is if you perform, it's an act and it's inauthentic. That is where I think a lot of people would say, oh, it's not a performance in that regard. So you just address that then, actually, and it is sort of depends where people are coming from. So if we talk about it and talk about what we think a performance is for starters, then it's going to sort of debunk it and get the elephant out of the room, hopefully.
Because the thing is, if you rock up on a Sunday morning to play in worship team and you're not really feeling it, you're expected to push past that emotionally in order to lead people in worship. And like, if you're authentically not feeling it, should there be space for that too? I mean, like I said, it really annoys me when people kind of just stand there looking miserable when they're playing on a worship team. But if that's kind of their authentic act of worship in that moment, you know?
Yeah, I think the best what you said then about being authentic is kind of the crux of whatever the performance looks like, isn't it? So like, and I think, you know, you've had, like you were talking about, people just looking downright miserable and bored when they're engaged in the worship team. I think that probably comes from a place of not feeling like they can be authentic. So like rocking up and maybe being like, you know what, I don't have it in me to be all guns blazing today, so I'll just go through the motions and put on my mask, pretend I'm okay, sort of thing. And those are probably the times when you do get that kind of engagement from whoever the musician is or singer, where they do look bored because they're probably hiding the fact that they have had a really awful week or day or whatever. So it kind of goes back to one of the questions earlier of just not being afraid of mess. So whether that performance, it always has to be authentic, because then it does cross the line into the negative terms of performance. If it does become, look at me, you don't want that. I mean, you don't want that in any aspect, whether that's kind of worship music or whatever band it is. You don't want someone there like, look at me, look at me, look at me. But it's just about being authentic in that, isn't it? So if you are the all guns blazing person who is wild on stage, you do it. But if there's a day where that same person literally just needs to be on their knees, do it. And it's just about kind of just being, like you said, authentic in whatever that performance looks like for you at the time. Because you don't know who that's going to encourage. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. I once led worship and my voice was ropey. I know my voice is ropey anyway, lads. I know you think that, but I was... I knew it was going to go.
It wasn't you, Rob. It was the Lord.
It was the Lord. I knew it was going to go, and I let it go. And I thought, stuff it, I don't care. And I'm just going to demonstrate that I can worship no matter what. And that was my heart behind it. And I've had other times where, the other week, I got really moved. It's a song that we've sung loads and loads, and rehearsed it over and over and over, and the words just slapped me in the face. And we just finished the first part before the sermon, and I was crying uncontrollably on the side of the stage. Came back for the last song, and I thought I was all right. I was thinking about the rugby and manly things, just to get myself beefed up. And I got to the last 3 lines of the song, and the words just slapped me in the face again. Holy Spirit. And I couldn't contain myself. I was... And just, instead of being like a really nice, I think it was yes and amen. It was like, all your promises, yes and amen. But I think that's so freeing, isn't it? Yeah, it's just showing. It's real.
It's so freeing. Like do that more, because
that spurs me on. Like, when I see that level of
100%.
Emotional authenticity, it spurs me on to worship.
But equally, when you don't feel like it as well. Because let's be real, we don't always feel up to it. It's a bit, I've got no hiding place where I'm at. I'm like, normally I've not got a guitar or nothing, I'm just there. And especially through lockdown, it's just been me on the camera. And you walk into the building and you're really scared because of COVID and what's been going on, and watching lots of the news, and it's really weird for starters. And then you have got to... It's sort of like, okay, I don't feel like this, but love is not a feeling, it's an act of your will. And Jesus didn't feel like going on the cross, probably. He didn't want to go through all that, so I am going to go through this, and I am going to give it my all. But in that, you're not pretending that you're all happy, shiny and happy. You're
exactly,
still
I think there's authenticity in that.
Yeah,
there's authenticity in that, 100%. Like, sometimes there's authenticity in the push through, but I think it's when maybe it's when the expectation is applied to you.
Put the mask on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you think like it's like just being a dad. There's some days where like it's tough. Do you know what I mean? But you can't just say no. You can't just say, oh, I'm not dadding today. You need to show up. That's not being unauthentic, though. That's being authentic in the place you're in, but you still showing up. Do you know what I mean? So the same thing can be applied to showing up as a worshipper. It doesn't mean that you need to put on the mask and pretend like everything's okay, but just show up and serve.
Amazing. So that was episode 1.
That was so good. That was amazing. That was super fun. And I really hope that it blesses people and gets people thinking and they can have these conversations with the people around them. Rob, thank you, dude. And Steve, as always, you are a wonderful, wonderful man to have conversations with. But it was so good. It was so good.
Oh, you too, bro. Looking forward to many, many more.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. We hope that you got as much from it as we did. We would absolutely love to have you all involved in these conversations. So please find us at Instagram and YouTube, both under the handle at Deconstructing Worship. And please send in any emails with any questions or anything that you would love involved within any kind of future episodes. And our email is deconstructingworship@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.